Darren is also currently working on a book that will expand upon many of the points he will be making here today, delving not only into the many different kinds of non-human and non-conventionally human intelligences we are in contact with, but also outlining an overarching model of reality that aims to explain the presence of these various groups while also drawing in other points of convergence, including psi phenomena, near-death experiences, and out-of-body experiences. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to my dear friend and esteemed colleague, the inimitable Darren King.
Hey, everybody. I can sort of see you out there. All right. First of all, super happy to be here, and I'm excited that we're all gathering in person post-COVID. Not only just gathering in general, but gathering as this group to discuss this topic and this subject matter is really exciting. I'm really thankful to Jay and James for putting this together. I'm guessing this is an unusual group that has a lot of experiencers and friends of experiencers, which makes us uniquely available and interested in this topic, I think. One of the things I like about the idea of this conference is that it's not about asking the same questions that we always ask about UFOs, like, are they really real? Are they there? I think most of us here know there's a there, something's really happening. And it's a lot of us, I think, who have delved into this deeply know it's much more complex than the surface layer that you hear in mainstream media, even when it is talked about. So that's some of the things I want to go into today. Some overarching parallels I see between different kinds of phenomena and what it might ultimately be saying about reality itself. And that's one thing I would say about this topic that's so fascinating is that I like to say this is the one topic that leaves every other topic unscathed. Because once you go here, you end up asking questions about the origins of humanity and the nature of reality itself. So first thing I like to say is what we colloquially call the UFO phenomenon, I actually see as an amalgam of different kinds of groups and different kinds of phenomena. So while some people tend to want to say this is one thing and perhaps it's just manifesting differently, that's been a common thinking about this, I see it as likely different groups with different agendas, sometimes even groups that are quite similar but still have different agendas. Just like human beings, there's complexity there. And quite different origin sources as well, I would say. So that really opens up the aperture, between ET, interdimensional, extraterrestrial, cryptoterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial, it goes on and on. But I think also those terms sort of fit with how we understand reality right now. And I think a lot of the times this will collapse and transcend into something deeper that kind of undoes some of our conventional thinking about what might be going on. Another thing I'd say, too, is that I think one thing this phenomenon does is it teaches us how little we understand about reality. That there are some people who are pretty confident that we understand what reality is, and this is sort of, we're just looking for the cherry on top to understand the UFO phenomenon and anomalous phenomena in general. But I think that's actually not the case. I think when we have that bias that we are almost there, we tend to think there's probably just one more thing we need to tweak in the model, whereas I think it's actually much more deep-seated than that and multifaceted and may actually end up reworking our entire understanding of reality. Another thing I'd say about the way we talk about the phenomenon and UFOs is that because it's not recognized as a conventional sort of field of inquiry, what ends up happening is you have a lot of armchair enthusiasts who adopt their favorite paradigm, their favorite hypothesis about what this is about, which is fine, and that's fun. And like Kelly said, I think that the questions are fascinating, and to me, I just enjoy the adventure, the grand mystery that we're all trying to solve. But that said, I think one of the challenges with the fact that this is an armchair enthusiast kind of endeavor is that we don't have any kind of mathematical precision about how we talk about these things. And so what ends up happening is that human bias, which is inevitable, ends up filtering in. And so people tend to just adopt whatever hypothesis they prefer to be the case. And that's one of the things that's great about science, and I'm very pro-science, even though I recognize some of the conventional thinking with metaphysics, the assumptions don't go far enough. But at least with science you have precision, so you can actually make predictions, you can follow through, see if that comes through or not, to justify your hypothesis, to confirm your hypothesis, or to perhaps open up new avenues of inquiry. Another thing I would say is that, and again, I'm saying this knowing that there's probably quite a few experiencers here in the group. I myself am an experiencer, and I know that I have a very solid sort of left brain critical mind in terms of thinking about these matters, but I know that personally when you've had experiences, it completely changes things beyond the hypothetical. So I would say that experiencer testimony is really essential for this topic, and if you notice the mainstream media coverage of this topic, what you'll find really, really lacking is there's no discussion of that. You'll see the same, Nimitz videos and whatnot, Tic Tacs and whatnot, discussed ad nauseum, and you'll see those same few clips over and over again in all sorts of different news media. But no one's actually going out and trying to interview experiencers. That happens to some degree on podcasts and whatnot amongst those who are kind of hardcore followers of this topic, but in the mainstream media, it's still not discussed. But I would say that of that, the thing is when you're looking just at what you can see in the sky, that's exciting and everything, and you have kind of the spectacle of that, but that doesn't tell you who it is and why they're here. And with experiencer testimony, that's exactly what we get. And what's very, very interesting is how much overlap there is between experiencer accounts, even cross-culturally and over time. So this says there's something really going on there and messages that I think we should pay attention to. So I would say that that's a really important key, that we need to pay attention to experiencer accounts. That's perhaps our most important data set at this point. Another thing I would say is that this is a pretty comprehensive topic. Some people want to reduce it to UFOs and aliens, but as Kelly said, I look at it in a more multifaceted way. There's UFOs, there's aliens, there's other kinds of non-human intelligence, there's near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, psi phenomena, telekinesis, telepathy, precognition. All of this factors in, and what's very interesting that makes you go, what's that about? What we also see in the data, and this was confirmed in the FREE study that was done a few years ago, is if you've experienced any one of those phenomena I just mentioned, you're much more likely than an average person from the population to experience others as well, which begs the question, is there something about these people from birth that makes them innately sort of pre-wired to have these kind of experiences? Or did one experience open something, or maybe even flip a switch that's dormant in all of us that made these people more open to having these experiences again? Another topic I wanted to quickly address was why it is that we have these alien groups supposedly encountering and giving messages to just random people. So they're not showing up to famous people, they're not showing up to presidents and prime ministers, famous scientists. They tend to show up to your average person. Could be anywhere around the world, and they usually impress upon these people that you really need to get the message out, which begs the question, if your agenda is to get the message out, why are you focusing on these people that no one knows? And they themselves say, why me? Like, nobody knows me. What am I going to do? I mean, I can maybe write a book and put it on Amazon and maybe 10 people will buy it, but how is that going to move this forward? And I've thought a lot about that. And one of the things I try to do in looking into this phenomena is pull in other data sets from elsewhere, other research that's being done, and see how does it apply here. And Rupert Sheldrake's done some really interesting research where he's seen in what he calls morphogenetic fields where certain kinds of inheritance happen even without genetics. So for instance, what happened was there was a group of rats that I think were in the UK, somewhere in Europe, and they were trained on this maze. And they learned to do the maze better and better until they actually became pretty proficient at it. Now what's interesting is they then went to Australia and had a different group of rats that obviously were not related to that first group of rats. And they actually learned the maze more quickly than the group in the UK, much more quickly, as if they were accessing some sort of collective unconscious, that there's some sort of memory bank that a species can pull from. And Carl Jung's talked about this as well in terms of the collective unconscious. And so I'm suggesting that perhaps, even while on the superficially it looks like what's really happening when they go and contact random people, what difference is that going to make? What that does is it seeds in our collective unconscious this deep-seated knowledge about these others in our midst. And then slowly more and more of us can pull from that sort of collective memory. Now, if any of you have studied the phenomenon in any detail, you'll have come across the figure of Jacques Vallée. He's my favorite researcher because he has been a trailblazer, and he was always sort of ahead of the curve. And so he began believing in the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but moved beyond that pretty quickly based on data and based on on-the-ground research that he was doing. So as we quickly go through sort of the history of ufology in the 20th century going into the 21st century, it very much follows the thinking and the progression of Jacques Vallée, who really steered the charge, even though a lot of people were behind him. And sometimes it was 10 or 20 years later that people kind of caught up. When he first brought to people's attention through Passport to Magonia and books like that, that some of this mirrors interactions that were being had with non-human intelligence going way back into history, pretty much as long as humankind has been around. Many people, especially in ufology, dismissed that and said, listen, we're talking about UFOs and aliens, don't talk about the Fae, or fairy lore, that kind of thing. It's a different thing. But Vallée just looked at it objectively and said, the data looks very, very similar, especially once you get beyond this superficial level and maybe the way that the culture was describing it in a certain way using certain vocabulary, but underlyingly it's very, very similar. So when we began with the ETH, it's very much because that was the final frontier. So I think now we have more understanding when you think about multiple dimensions and whatnot, that there could be other ways that these beings could be coming into our midst. But back in the 20th century, early to mid part of the 20th century, if you think about it, that was really the only frontier we assumed we had not chartered yet. So when craft showed up in the sky, or what looked like craft, sometimes it's more like phenomena, like light phenomena, but when that showed up in the sky, people assumed that this has got to be aliens from Venus or Mars. That was the initial thinking. And then eventually that sort of went out further and further into the cosmos once we recognized via probes and whatnot that we had sent to these planets that they seemed largely barren and lifeless. But initially that was the ETH, was the sense that it makes sense if there's these others, they're non-human. We're seeing craft that are so sophisticated that they can't be the product of any nation state, that the assumption was they must be extraterrestrial. But we do not stop there, as we will soon find out.